Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, back again for another round of the investigative journal on First Amendment Radio. Greg Anthony here. And yesterday, if you caught my show, if you didn't, go to it. And you'll learn a little bit about the political situation and really looking at it from a perspective that you don't hear on the mainstream or on most of the alternative stations, because they just don't have the knowledge or the fortitude to tell the truth. Some don't have the knowledge, some have it and want to hide it from you. Kind of people like Sean Hannity, you've heard of him on the right, Rush Limbaugh, then you have on the left all those CNN anchors. They're paid quite handsomely, over millions of dollars, to keep from getting at the truth that we get at here. Told you a long time ago, the truth doesn't pay. Crime pays. Lying pays. In this world we live in. It's that simple. But you know what? I did end the show yesterday. I got a couple emails saying, Greg, why did you play Walter Veith? I thought you were going to get into the political Trump system and what's going on today in Washington. And I'm going to do that for you today. But I will play a little bit of Walter Veith because he does talk about, right where I left off yesterday, he was talking a lot about prophecy, which is kind of a backdrop for all of it, because these guys are in the pockets of the Jesuit and the Vatican Luciferian system, leading to a one-world government, a one-world order. And they can't get it without America being on the team. And that's what you're seeing going on. And all the other countries as well, working together to form this one-world government, one-world order that we're seeing play out right before our very eyes as our rights get dwindled away, get lost away. And, you know, isn't it amazing, though, when you listen to what's going on in Washington, and all you get on the news are these pitiful fights between the Democrats and the Republicans, and all of this backstabbing and all this name-calling, and all of these things that really have nothing to do with what's really going on behind the scenes of the problems that are mounting worldwide, the problems that are mounting in America aren't being dealt with because they don't want to be dealt with. They have to have a cover. They have to have these people in the news talking about whether you're a liberal or whether you're a conservative, and you're constantly being barraged with all this nonsense. And so before, where I left off with Walter yesterday, in the second half of my show, was he gave you kind of a prophetic look at that, what the Bible had been saying about where this whole system is leading to and who is behind it. And he pinpointed it quite well. And just as the half hour ended, he began to talk about what he called the trump card. So I will get to that a little later, but I promised that I'd explain it from my perspective. And to do this, let's go back to, well, let's look at the Vietnam War. Now, many of you youngsters out there don't remember what was going on, but America was being torn apart similar to the way it is today, but the war was the vehicle for the Jesuits and the ruling class to split America in half and to tear it from its seams. And I don't believe it's ever recovered since. Going into the Vietnam War, we saw this communist scare that Ho Chi Minh from North Vietnam was teaming up with Red China and Russia, and at the time, the communist scare was prevalent in America. That's all you heard of as a kid. And so the premise behind the war was that we were going to stop communism in its tracks in Vietnam. But little did we know back then that we were funding and we were operating on both sides of the war. We didn't want that war to end. We didn't want to win that war. We were there to create chaos, to create this enemy, to begin to split apart America at the seams here with social unrest. You saw it with the anti-war movements. You saw it with the pro-war people during Vietnam. And all of this needless killing was going on without any intention that we were ever fighting a cause that was worthwhile. Now, what I mean by that, communism is something that was created back in the 1600s by the Jesuits in the Paraguay experiments. They called them the Paraguay reductions. And they were instrumental in creating this form of government. Why was it created? To create an enemy to the West, so that they could play this game of one side against the other to get their way. So what did Vietnam usher in? I say we have in this country never recovered from it. And now we're seeing this social unrest unraveling in another way. And I'll get to that in a moment. So we have Vietnam being this powder keg, this war, unwinnable war, vets coming back going, why are we there? What are we fighting for? I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam. Remember all the songs? If you were back growing up as I did in Vietnam during that time, you'd understand quite well what was going on. And behind it, so we have this creation of communism, our elitists understanding how this works, basically was funding the war. They knew that Ho Chi Minh in the North, the communist movement, was going to prevail as far back as Kennedy and Nixon, when the Pentagon Papers back then were released, showing that the secretaries of state and the defense and the presidents knew that the South Vietnamese government was in shambles, knew that the South Vietnamese army, ARVN, was incapable of dealing with the insurgency of the North, funded by, you're getting Western money, you're getting armament being given to the North Vietnamese by China, by Russia, and we understood it was a hopeless battle. We should have never been there to begin with. And Kennedy, one of the reasons he was killed is he did want to get us out of there as early as 1962, but they had to fight 10 more years for no reason, with all these deaths, with the motive to be using this fake communistic scare and this push telling Americans that we had to stop communism in its tracks in Vietnam, when in fact it was a creation of the very people controlling our government, that were behind controlling our government, controlling the rulers, the presidents that were selected to be put in office. And that's why when Vietnam kind of ended, but it never really did, the goal had been achieved by the elites, by the Vatican-led New World Order, and that was to rip apart America at the seams. I don't think you remember a lot of the little things that were going on back then. Now, let me just remind you, we all remember, you hear about the convention in Chicago, 1968, with the protests, and you see the pictures of the police pounding on anti-war protesters. But we forget about when the movement started with the Vietnam vets against the war. Now, how did those Vietnam vets ever get put together? Well, guess who was their leader? John Kerry. Remember his eloquent speech that was ripping apart our military and ripping apart our motives for being in Vietnam? Well, John Kerry was planted there. He was playing the Hegelian dialectic. He was sitting there going, we have military men. Our military is slaughtering people over there. They're beheading people. They are basically killing innocents, acting like animals, which many soldiers that heard this were opposed to what he said and were very angered. But he did say some things that were honest to God true, and that was the battle for the body counts. That was the motive for Vietnam. That's how they decided they'd win the war. If we killed 200 North Vietnamese and we only lost 50, it was a victory. But the problem was, wars were never fought by body counts. They were fought by taking terrain, pushing the enemy out, and sustaining that movement. No, that didn't happen in Vietnam. They would go up, they'd name a hill. Remember Hill 472. They would take Hill 472, lose hundreds of men, and then would leave it, and then the North Vietnamese would come back. I mean, it was a ridiculous war. Kerry brought that out as well. But John Kerry turned out to be an elitist. You know, the Secretary of State under, presidential candidates, Secretary of State under Obama. He was put in there. The anti-war movement was staged as well. And although many people were against the war, the Vietnam soldiers that came back were led by an insider, might as well say a co-intel, who shaped the strategy and who moved right in there to be nothing more than one of the Vaticanites and Vatican-led New World Order minion, John Kerry. So, we see right when the Vietnam veterans were protesting, they came right to the Capitol Hill steps, and I remember they put up a barbed wire wooden fence barrier to keep out the people that fought this war, to keep them out of the Capitol building. Isn't that amazing? So the police were instructed not to arrest any of the Vietnam anti-war veterans. And they were instructed to wait for the, in quote, crazies that were going to descend upon Washington. So they knew that the next volley of people coming in were going to be the agitators that were many being paid to create havoc in Washington, similar to what went on after the Trump inauguration. Remember? We have these groups now that move in wearing black, destroying cars, throwing rocks through windows. We've seen it at Berkeley. We've seen it in Washington, D.C. The same kind of disruption went on during the anti-Vietnam War protests. And after the veterans left Washington, in come the crazies, as many of the senators and congressmen termed them. And they said, now we'll get our arrests. And boy, if you look back at some of the video clips, they were doing the exact same thing. Bombing, starting fires, throwing rocks at the police, burning cars in Washington, D.C. The same civil strife was going on back then that you're going to see going on now for basically similar reasons, but different motives, right? So the Vietnam War was I'm looking at it from the viewpoint of how the elites manufactured this war, killed many, many people, South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, and, of course, American citizens and soldiers, and many innocents. And it led to the disruption, I believe, of this country. From that point on, you didn't see any president that wasn't selected by the power elite, selected years in advance. And that goes on to this day. So, I got about 15 minutes here before, in the second half hour, I'm going to finish up with Walter Veith and the Trump card and his viewpoint of Trump, probably relating it a little bit to prophecy, but showing why he was put there. And when I say put there, he was put there. He was selected years in advance. Now I'm going to use kind of a cartoonish way of explaining it. But if you go back to some of the Simpsons shows, they will actually, 8 to 10 years prior to his coming down that elevator, running for the presidency, that exact same picture was shown to you in The Simpsons. Exactly, his hand movements, the same clothes he wore, the same people coming down that elevator, exactly the same. And that is their way of laughing in your face, telling you that we have selected Donald Trump already. Now, people ask, when that first time he walked down that elevator, people asked me, who's going to win? And nobody thought Trump would win. He doesn't have a chance. And I said long before many people, Trump has already been selected. Don't worry about it. It'll work out for him. And that's exactly what happened. It didn't work out just for him, but it works out for the strategy of the Vatican-led New World Order, controlling our political movement, controlling the way people think, and controlling exactly what's going on in our political and social systems. And that's what happened. So what you saw when Trump was selected and finally took over the presidency, if you just look to his campaign, it showed to me, this is what showed to me that, wow, if anybody doesn't really understand the Hegelian dialectic, this is your perfect example. Because here they had brought in a guy that was brash, that was an outsider supposedly, although he's an insider. They don't tell you he's also a long-lost cousin of Hillary Clinton. They come from the same royal bloodlines. So they bring in a guy like Trump, who's already been groomed for this job. He's a billionaire, talks like he's a construction worker, and he uses language in the same terms. He's not afraid to not be politically correct. And he's really giving that impression that he's upsetting the apple cart. And now you have this huge fight starting. It started in the campaign, and it's gone on now for 3 years to keep the Americans, people, away from really the goal and what they're doing behind the scenes to take over this country and to put it into their new world system. And people are going to accept it and love it until, you know what, it's the fan after it's all over. But Trump's playing his part quite well. And I always say at this point, these people are just actors, given a part to play. And Hillary Clinton was given her part to play. Trump was given his part to play. And they were diametrically opposed, right? You know Hillary Clinton's stance on many things. You know the family she came from. You know Bill Clinton and all of his escapades, what he stood for. And you knew she was coming from this area of corruption, this area of the Clintons and all of their crimes that have been covered up. Now, during the campaign, they were going to use this to distract the American people. And it worked to a T. And it also gave enough people the impetus to come out and support Trump in droves, because they were supposedly tired of the establishment, supposedly tired of the Clintons, tired of this corruption. And what did they get? They got a guy who said he's going to do it, but hasn't done a damn thing outside of talk about how great America's going to be. Oh yeah, the stock market is booming. He says jobs are getting great. I don't believe it is as great as he says. He says this is an economic boom. America's coming back. He's pouring money into the military. Huh? Yeah, he's rebuilding what Obama destroyed and what was been destroyed after the Vietnam War, putting together a ragtag military. I mean, can you believe that half our airplanes weren't even able to get off the ground? And Obama allowed this to happen. So now Trump's throwing in billions of dollars to get the military back in shape. Seems to be fighting against the whole world, right? Bringing America back to a status. We're not going to take shit from anybody anymore. We're not going to take shit from you when it comes to war, and we're not going to take shit from you when it comes to trade. And so Trump is out there beating the drum of America first. Trade wars. Let's start tariffs. We're going to be treated fairly. America's done giving away everything. And in a sense, it vibrates with a lot of American people. And I'm not even getting to the border immigration battles that are going on, which is another Hegelian dialectic being played out. So Trump is strong on the border. Let's keep the illegal aliens out. Creating this, what? a division between half of America is being torn apart over many different issues. Not to mention the Supreme Court justices that's going on in Washington today and all the arguments that are going on there. Nothing's getting done, and it is planned this way. Nothing substantial. Obamacare is still around. That should have been gone if the Republicans were in power. That's still around. You're going to see basically a stalling of everything till the Democrats get back in the Congress and get control of the Senate or the Congress, and then nothing ever will get done. It doesn't get done anyway, and the Republicans control the House, Senate, and the presidency. No. And let me tell you why. Because they've planned it this way. They've got Trump in there, rattling cages. Then we're going back and forth now with all of this supposed during his, work during his campaign to keep him from being president. But they all along knew he was going to win. They wanted him to win. But it was a game they're playing, the part they were playing. The actors were doing their job. So Clinton, during that period of time, was getting involved in all these scandals of her private server as a Secretary of State. She was using her own little email and server and computer system, sending state secrets all over the place. Not to mention Benghazi. Not to mention the Fast and Furious scandal. Remember that? All of these things going on where, as we moved past Clinton's loss, which was planned, we get into Trump's presidency. What happens? All of this stuff that Clinton did is being forgotten about for a reason. And they come up with this idea that Trump was colluding with the Russians to get elected, which is completely bogus. And that's how they're presenting it. But they create a special counsel that's been at this for almost a year and a half. Hasn't found any evidence of a crime. You're not even supposed to have a special counsel unless they're moving towards proving a crime. And in the meantime, the Justice Department that is supposedly under Trump is trying to prosecute Trump, and all of the people in the federal FBI that have been nabbed for allowing, trying to frame Trump for things he didn't do. This is planned, by the way. And at the same time, overlooking all of the blatant crimes that Clinton committed. And what is that doing to the American people? It is showing them there is no longer any fair justice in America, just like they want to show you. They want to show you that your country is no longer functioning. It's no longer working. And that's why everyone, whether you're on the Republican or Democratic side, are being set up for really what they want. And that is, your country no longer works. We have to create a new system. And you're seeing a lot of these new systems come out on the Democratic side. The socialistic Democrats now are proposing all of these things that to half America seem crazy. But again, by showing you at the highest levels every day in the news that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Justice Department is corrupt, and the crimes that should be adjudicated aren't being, and the ones that they're pushing to prove don't even amount to any crimes. And a lot of the people that are getting caught up in this are being used as scapegoats and are really being played again by this kind of system that they're working out. They're all planned. It's all planned. And listen, I'm running out of time this half hour, so I'm going to be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app, for all of your mobile devices. Streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour. I'm going to continue on a bit here before I get into Walter Weiss. He's going to talk a little bit about how the United States fits into the big picture of the Vatican-led New World Order's plans for a one-world government, one-world religion. We'll get to that in a moment. But as I was saying, this whole idea of Trump being selected and what's going on in our political system is a perfect example of how this theater and the Hegelian dialectic operates. Of course, we have nothing but America being split. We're seeing the racial divisions even come back like they were before Martin Luther King. We're seeing the country being torn between America, the conservative ideals, and also now the new communistic Democratic Party, Socialistic Democratic Party, and both of these groups fighting a battle of words in Washington, D.C., and a battle of using, let's say, the FBI and using the Justice Department as an example of how this country's going awry. So we have, and how is Trump, I'm going to end it right here because I'll talk about this tomorrow again. How do I know Trump is a plant? Very simple. He's allowing his Justice Department, he put in an Attorney General who's doing nothing, and he's allowing his Justice Department to create this atmosphere, and the FBI, that everything in his campaign was being colluded with Russia, and he shouldn't be there, and they're investigating these things, while at the same time he could just stop the whole thing, or if he had an Attorney General that was really for real, that this investigation will get stopped, and then you'd go after the real criminals in the Clinton side of this, in the Democratic side. But they're being allowed to go scot-free allowing the American people to just look at this and go, how could this be? Our system is broken. That's exactly what they want. So you can catch a lot of this, both sides of this Hegelian dialectic, if you listen to Fox News or you listen to CNN, and you'll get my drift. But I'll come back and talk a little bit more in depth on this tomorrow on Friday. But let me get to Veith again here as he talks a little bit about the Trump card. Okay, let me get to him right now.
Get to the United States of America. One of the most loved presidents of all time was this man, JFK, John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy was a Catholic, and you would expect this Roman Catholic to take a Catholic position, but he didn't. He took a Protestant position. And he made a speech which so irked the powers that be that maybe it led to his demise. Whether it did or not, that's not the subject of this evening. He said the following, and he said it with such pathos. He said, I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president, who might appoint him, or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will directly or indirectly upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials, and where religious liberty is so indivisible that an act against one church is treated as an act against all. Isn't that beautiful? Freedom of conscience. You can decide what you want to believe, and nobody is allowed to tell you what to believe. That is freedom of religion. Church and state separate. The Bible tells me that this will cease to exist. That they will make an image to the first beast, church and state will come together, and they will enforce their dictates. That's what the Bible says. It sounds impossible. Remember this speech. In the book Tragedy and Hope, which is a rather interesting one, Carol Quigley, who was Bill Clinton's mentor, and Carol Quigley, by the way, was a professor at Georgetown University, the Jesuit university. And by the way, historically, do you know why the Jesuits were created? Why they came into existence? They came into existence to deal with a specific crisis of which you were a part. In fact, the crisis was Protestantism. And their aim was to destroy Protestantism. And the present Pope is a Jesuit. Now, you might believe that Rome has changed and that it doesn't reflect the image of the Middle Ages anymore, but we will have to look into that, into some detail, and that's why I don't want you to miss the next lectures. Now, this man said something very interesting as well. He also said that the world is ruled by a very small, powerful elite, of which he is a member. That was a fascinating statement. The world is ruled by a very powerful elite of which he is a member? Well, what was he? He was a Jesuit. Is he trying to say that the Jesuits control what people think and do? Leave it at that. He also said the argument of two parties, that's political parties, should represent opposed ideas and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea, acceptable only to doctrinate and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. The policies that are vital and necessary for America are no longer subject of significant disagreement, but are disputable only in details of procedure, priority, or method. So he's saying basically that whether you vote for the party in red or the party in blue doesn't make any difference. You're wasting your time. Basically, that's what he's saying. Now, there's another component that's very interesting, and that is how to channel the mindset of people into a particular direction, that they all start thinking the same way. And this has been done politically over eons, and it works every time. And that's called the Hegelian dialectic. Hegel was a philosopher who thought these things up, or gave it a name at least. And that is what we have there in the two political parties represented there. So what is a Hegelian dialectic? It's a framework for guiding thoughts and actions into conflicts that lead to synthetic solutions, which can only be introduced once those being manipulated take a side that will advance the predetermined agenda. Brilliant. Brilliant. Controlled opposition, problem, reaction, solution. That is how the Hegelian dialectic works. So let's say I wanted to change your mindset so that you would return and cling to your Christianity whether you believe it or not. Then I must create a threat which seems greater to you than clinging to your atheism or whatever. And I must herd you into this idea. I must get rid of this threat. That which I had was better than that which I have now. I'm going to think like this. That would be one way to herd people. Now, here's Obama.
Get out of here.
Quite humorous.
Come on.
He's the one who says Trump
That's
is
enough.
unfit to serve as president, and many are singing that tune. But here you can see the American flag in tatters, Iraq disaster, the rise of ISIS, weak border security, race relations at an all-time low, the Obama-Hillary legacy, all the issues of morality that seem to have gone down the tube to such an extent that chaos breaks out. Now, if the chaos starts exceeding...
You see what happens? You start talking about chaos. And the dogs create their own Hegelian dialectic here, one trying to take the milk bone from the other. And I solved that problem quick.
...exceeding a certain boundary, then people will be herded into nets of safety. Are you with me? Now, this was being done. Whether it is being done deliberately or not is neither here nor there. I believe it's being done largely deliberately, but you don't have to believe that if you don't want to. And this man said, the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet Islam. Now that scared the wits out of many people in the United States of America, because they were seeing themselves already under Sharia law. And that scares people. So herding people in a direction. And then the loss of morality in the world. The White House lit up with rainbow of the same-sex marriage ruling. It just seemed to such a large proportion of the populace that the values that they grew up with seemed to be going down the drain. And that hurts people into a collective mindset. Now, what does the Bible say is going to happen to the United States? Is there going to be a mindset, yes or no? Yes. What is that mindset? The mindset that there is one set of morality, and that if people don't accept that morality, then they don't have a right to exist. Are we heading that way? Is there going to be a pendulum swing from absolute liberalism to absolute authoritarian conservatism? Is that possible? It seems to me mankind just doesn't have the capacity to make the pendulum stop in the middle. Once it's swung to one side and you let it go, inevitably swings to the other side. And there are forces which will force it in that direction. Strange that at the same time, while endorsing the Prophet Muhammad, he will also endorse the legacy of Pope Francis. And he will say that this is the man that we should follow. And even more fascinating, that he gave him the same stature and above that he gave to any incumbent president or incoming president. Because when Pope Francis visited the United States, he followed the exact same sequence as one who actually becomes a president. First went to the White House, was received with great pomp. Then he went to the Capitol, spoke to both houses of the government, made a speech in which he very cleverly cited certain individuals which stood for certain ideologies, planting a seed that these ideologies should become part and parcel of any system of governance. And when that speech was over, not like a normal president, new president who will go out the bottom doors and be greeted by the populace, he went out on the balcony, which means he's over and above what a president stands for, and was greeted by the populace, as you can see here. So, from there, he went to the United Nations, and became the first pope to speak to the world leaders at the United Nations. Now you'll say to me, that's not true. Many popes spoke at the United Nations. True. But they never spoke to the world leaders. They only spoke to the diplomats, to the representatives. But here was the 70th anniversary, and all the world leaders were there, and this man proceeded from this inauguration to speak to the entire world leadership. Fascinating. We don't have time to go into that. There's another...
So, Mr. Veith has proved, again, and I've said this myself on shows when we go over the same things that when the Pope came here, that he was given a audience in our Senate, in our Congress. He was then given an audience above, given a stature above even the President of the United States, and then he proceeded to the United Nations to speak to all the world leaders as the number one man. So he has basically shown to you right there, when we say that the Vatican is in control of this new world order, using the Jesuit order as their main assassins and spies and strategists. We're not making this up. And that showed you exactly in the way they think, in the way they present it to us, why when we say the Vatican-led New World Order here is the truth. Now, it'll be played to the American people that he's a humble, pious man, and so he's given that podium, but it's for a very different reason.
The lecture on what he said and what it means. And then these two ideologies, the pendulum swing from the left to the pendulum swing on the right, came into conflict. And it was a bitter conflict with many, many harsh words spoken. And people chose sides. But when it came to the red meal, they were quite cheerfully sitting on either side of the representative of the Knights of Malta, the highest Knight of Malta in the United States of America, the Cardinal of New York, Cardinal Dolan. And he was also the man who did the prayer at the inauguration of the new president. So these are strange issues where these parties come together and talk. And they are very cheerful, but very acrimonious when it comes to talking about each other. Now, just for interest's sake, not that it has any particular relevance, but just for interest's sake, As it turns out, both Trump and Hillary Clinton are related to John Gaunt, a 14th century royal. So they have royal lineage. Trump is related through his mother, Mary Ann McLeod, back to the 17th great-grandfather, John Beaufort, etc., etc., and the Clintons and all of these were all related. And if you look at the American presidential bloodlines, you'll see. Did you know that all 44 U.S. presidents have carried European royal bloodlines into office? 34 have been genetic descendants of just one person, Charlemagne, the brutal 8th century king of the Franks. Now I find that interesting, that they're all descendants of basically one man who was the first one to be crowned emperor of the Holy Roman Empire under Rome. Just an interesting fact, could be pure coincidence. 19 of them directly descended from King Edward III of England. Well, just an interesting fact. Also interesting is that the little cartoon, The Simpsons, predicted President Trump presidency. Now, it's also interesting that this same little cartoon managed to predict so many other things so accurately, so many years in advance. It's almost as if they have a prophetic line. But be that as it may, I'll just show you some pictures. This little cartoon is, of course, very heavily steeped in occultism with all the Illuminati symbolism and all of this stuff in it. Let's not even go there. But I find it interesting that they, in the year 2000, which is 17 or 16 years before this election, showed the candidate which not only had the same clothes on and the same beads and the same colored dress, but representing, of course, Hillary Clinton. And I find that rather fascinating. And they got it pretty right and accurate with Donald Trump as well. There's their cartoon of the year 2000. He's even got the same clothes on. They're pretty good, right? I think they're clairvoyants or something. Or else they know something we don't know. And this also. Oh no! It couldn't be true. Surely this didn't happen to us. Well, be that as it may, I'm not interested in going into those details. Let's not be conspiratorial, which is a word that many people are very allergic to. Let's stick to the facts. Let's just look at what is happening. 5 faith facts on Mike Pence, a born-again evangelical Catholic. Now, do you know what an oxymoron is? An oxymoron is a contradiction in terms. Now, if there ever was a contradiction in terms, then it is an evangelical Catholic. It's impossible. You're either an evangelical or you're a Catholic, but you can't be an evangelical Catholic unless there has been some kind of marriage that is strange, to say the least. But that is where we're heading to. That's where the Hegelian mindset has to take humanity, because that divide between Catholicism and Protestantism has to go. And Mike Pence, postmodern evangelical Catholic conservative. That's the running mate and the vice president. The Washington Post says, yes, Donald Trump really went to an Ivy League school. I'd like to know, where was he educated? And it tells us where he was educated, and I think we can trust the Washington Post there. And it says, first he went to a private school, then he went to military school, and then he went to Fordham University, a Jesuit school. So he was trained in a Jesuit institution, which doesn't mean very much. Many people are trained there. And then he went to the University of Pennsylvania, and that is also a Catholic-run institution, which is not directly Jesuit, but indirectly Jesuit. It's also interesting that some of his children are trained, or were trained, at Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit institute. So he is associated with Jesuit institutes. What about Mike Pence. Mike Pence is also very much a creation of the last half century of American political religious life. Did you notice that? Political religious life, something which should be totally what? Separate. Born and raised Catholic, he became a Catholic youth minister, reportedly wanted to be a priest, so this is a very serious Catholic. And then he began blending his Catholicism with evangelical Protestantism, and I made a commitment to Christ. I'm born again evangelical Catholic. Now, I'm not denying his credentials. I'm just saying that theologically, this is a misnomer. But let's look at the other side. His counterpart was Tim Kaine. So if Hillary had come in, then the vice president would have been Tim Kaine. Now I wonder where he was trained. Well, let's have a look. This is Harvard Divinity School. I think that's a reputable source, don't you think? What do they say? Kaine was educated at a Jesuit high school and has been influenced throughout his life by Jesuits. Often seen as progressive and open-minded in the U.S., he also has been called Pope Francis Catholic. What does it mean to be a liberal Catholic reformer?
Okay, I got to break it off there. We'll come back tomorrow. I'll talk a little bit more about the Trump card and maybe finish up here with Walter Veith back on the Investigative Journal. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Back tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.